And so it was a case of like noticing things at a deeper level, because so much of life is at that surface level. It's, you know, everything's how things appear and how we perceive things and all this sort of stuff. And actually noticing what we are noticing is going beyond the language. It's going beyond the surface. It's noticing what we're feeling when we're having a particular conversation, or when we're experiencing a piece of art or a piece of music or whatever it is, and then doing something with that. And I think that's one of the keys to kind of getting that sense of almost purpose for ourselves. Like, you know, it's such a cliche and so difficult to pin down, you know, find your passion, do you, and it's just a small way of locating that sense of what matters to you.
Hi there, this is Sarah Kuhn. If you are an INFJ or in a relationship with an INFJ or related to an INFJ in any way, and you want to figure out how they operate, what makes them tick, and how to communicate with them better, this is the show for you. It's called The Quiet Ones. This is a show that deconstructs INFJs, what they are, how they think, how they feel, how they operate, and how they relate to people with other personality types. Whether you have just found out that you're an INFJ or have known for a number of years, there is something for everyone. You will learn more about your personality type so that you understand who you are and understand how you operate in the workplace, in relationships, in your family, and with friends. I want you to walk away from every episode feeling like you have a place of belonging, feeling like you are no longer alone, feeling like you have a place to be heard and seen and understood as you really are. This is a place to connect with other INFJs, to learn and grow and really thrive. I want to give you inspiration and real-life strategies that are going to help you figure out how to live your best life every single day. Though INFJs are very rare, you are not alone in this world. You are not the only one who thinks the way that you do and feels the way that you do. Hear from real INFJs just like you. Hi there, Sarah Kuhn here. Welcome to another episode of The Quiet Ones. You guys, if you haven't heard yet, my book is out. I am so excited. It's been out for a week now, and I know that a bunch of you have already gotten a copy. If you haven't, make sure that you do. You can go to infjwoman.com and get all of the information there. It is a great resource for any INFJ, especially if you've just found out that you're INFJ, or if you're looking for some basic information about INFJs, kind of a baseline to get you going. It goes through each one of our preferences, which is the letters INFJ, and then I talk about functions a little bit, and then we go through some of the things that INFJs deal with the most, like communication, relationships, your career, and your purpose. So it's a great resource. Make sure that you go and get a copy. I think really every INFJ should read it. I poured my heart and soul into this book, and I'm so glad that it's done and out there. And yeah, make sure you go grab a copy of it. All right, you guys, let's get to the interview. I'm so excited for you to hear this interview. It was a really, really great conversation that I had with Andy Mort. Andy is a UK-based musician, writer, and podcaster. He's the founder of The Haven, which is a membership community dedicated to support and encourage gentle rebels who are creative introverts and sensitive types to find and share their voices with the world. He produces the Gentle Rebel podcast, which is a monthly show dedicated to helping people unleash their creativity and to find the courage to make their own quiet stand for what truly matters in life to them. Just as a reminder, you can watch the video interview on YouTube at youtube.com/thequietonespodcast. And you can find all of the links that we mentioned in the show and the show notes on my website at thequietonespodcast.com. Hey there.
Hi, Sarah. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
All right. So tell me about your personality type. What type are you?
Well, I am. That's a very good question, and one that has kind of left me a little bit befuddled over the years. But when I first took Myers-Briggs, came out as an INTJ, and that made a lot of sense in some ways, but it didn't make sense in other ways. And then I I took it again and came out INFJ, and then took it again and it was INTJ. And so there's that kind of crossover has been very, very real. And then kind of it was probably about 2 or 3 years later, came across the highly sensitive person kind of research, and read Elaine Aron's book about sensory processing sensitivity. And I was like, I think that's the kind of that piece that's missing in that sense of like, actually, I feel very deeply. I am quite analytical, and I am quite methodical, and all those things that the kind of archetypal INTJ personality kind of presents. But also, I get really into art. I feel very deeply around all that sort of stuff. So knowing and kind of growing up, it was things like reacting to strong sensory stimuli, like loud sudden noises and lighting and all that sort of stuff. That was a kind of and I'd been speaking to other INTJs, and they were like, "What are you talking about?" So it's kind of a yeah, you're looking for that sense of solidarity, like, oh, you're an INTJ, I'm an INTJ, might
Right.
share this kind of thing. It's like, no, you're just looking at me blankly. So yeah, it's a tricky thing, but a sensitive INT/FJ, I'd say.
Yeah, it is tricky. I was mistyped as an INTJ for a while too, and I think part of it is because when you're INFJ, you use both the thinking and the feeling side of your brain. And
Mm-hmm.
so I know for me, I wanted to be seen as an INTJ because I didn't want to identify as having feelings.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
it took, because I don't have like outward emotions. I'm not dramatic. I don't scream and yell. It's terrifying to me when I'm crying in front of people. Like, I hate that.
Mm.
And it took my 13-year-old niece to be like, you are lying to yourself. You are actually a really feeling person because you're always talking about feelings and thinking about other people's feelings. And she's like, you're not a thinking type, because she's an INTP. So,
Right.
we process things differently.
Mm-hmm.
But everything that you said about noises affecting you and, being highly sensitive, that's exactly how I am too.
Mm.
I went to Las Vegas one time and I literally felt like my brain was melting because there's noises coming from every angle, and there's so many different smells and so many people and the lights flashing everywhere. And it was like, I can't with this. I can't.
Yeah, I've never braved Las Vegas. I don't think I'd last a day. Yeah, that's really interesting what you say about that kind of sense of thinking you're an INTJ, or even being mistyped as an INTJ, and actually that kind of almost the nurturing aspect of that being, because I mean I've had the same sort of things, like growing up, almost suppressing the emotional side of things, or kind of just switching that off, and actually, as you say, just listening to that, the way that you talk about it and the way that you think about feelings, and you can see it in other people, and you can almost connect dots there, is a real clue to the way that your kind of your mind engages with that sort of stuff. That's yeah,
Yeah.
astute
I've
point
I've
about that.
been learning so much about how it affects you when you grow up, what people
Mm.
say to you, and your family environment, and if it's okay for you to express your feelings. Um, I learned not too long ago that I have a problem with anger, and it's like, I don't have a problem with anger. I was working with a life coach, and she's like, "You have a problem with anger," and I'm like, I don't have a problem with anger. I never get angry. I'm usually pretty chill about everything. And she's like, that's your problem. You never get angry.
Mm.
And she goes, what happens when you get really angry? How do you express it? And I'm like, well, when I get extremely angry, I usually start crying. And she goes, well, that's because you never felt safe being angry, but you felt safe when you were crying. Like, you felt safe to be sad, but you never felt safe to be angry. Um, and it's just
Mm.
like little realizations like that that have helped me so much to think about, even when you're in school, you're taught you need to speak up. You need to, not sit in the front of the class, but not sit in the back of the class. You need to work in group projects. And it's this constant message of you're wrong for doing what you're doing. You're wrong for wanting to read rather than engage with everybody else. You know, you're wrong for being quiet. You need to be different than what you are. And it has such an impact on how you think about yourself and how you understand yourself. Because when you grow up feeling like you're wrong, you get to be 35 and you're like, wow, I don't even know what to do with my life. I have all these problems I can't fix, when really it comes down to there really isn't that much you need to fix. You just need to accept how you are and think about things a little bit differently.
That's a really good point. And that, yeah, those messages that are coming from outside, they get baked in and internalized. And it's interesting what you say about the anger as well, because as a man, the anger thing, and Robert Webb talks about this in his book How Not to Be a Boy, which is a fantastic read. But he basically says, growing up as a sensitive boy, the only emotion that you're allowed to show as a male is anger. So everything gets funneled through, as you say, like with crying is the thing that you do as the safety place. Like for Robert, talks about, if you feel excited, if you feel scared, if you feel anxious, if you feel happy, all of these things as a kind of male being nurtured not in a helpful or healthy kind of emotional place, the only thing that is actually an acceptable emotion to show, to filter that into, is anger. And like that was when I heard him, because I listened to the audiobook version, I was like, that's so true. And you see it, and I've seen it so often in life, is like, going to football matches and you see blokes on the terraces, like supposedly having a great time, and they're in the place that they really enjoy being, and they're just like, flicking the V's at each other and shouting and abusing one another. And it's like, and that's the way that they express this almost feeling of joy inside. And so, yeah, that's a really interesting thing to think about, and for people to just reflect on, is that sense of like, what are my go-to kind of ways of expressing emotion, and how am I, what's that kind of difference between the emotion that I'm feeling and the way that it's coming out in my behavior, I suppose. Yeah, it's really, good point.
Yes. It's this huge learning experience, honestly, because you kind of have to go back and say, okay, what was I taught? And what are the things that people were always telling me? And then think about how you reacted to them and how you process them. And it's this really deep thing that it's interesting, and you really learn a lot about yourself. But I'm so glad to talk to you, because there are so many guys who are offended by the name of my blog, which is INFJ Woman. And they think that I only know how to speak to women. And a lot of guys have told me that guys have a different experience and they want to hear from somebody else. So I'm really excited to talk to you. And I would love to hear about your story, because I know that you have a blog and a podcast and you write music. So I'd love to hear about how all of that happened and how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So, I suppose, starting where I am at the moment, and then I'll kind of work back. But yeah, as you say, kind of do present a podcast. It's just become a monthly podcast, actually, called The Gentle Rebel. And basically talking to introverted and highly sensitive kind of creative types who really have that sense of something bubbling inside them, but the things are holding them back from working out what their voice is, what their message is, and all that sort of stuff. And just sort of cutting loose from those things. And I run a kind of dive deeper membership site called The Haven, which is just a place that we kind of get more deeply into that sort of stuff. And my blog is evolved into this place where a lot of the stuff that I write about is kind of around creativity and temperament and that kind of stuff, which it started probably, it's about 10 years ago I started, or maybe a bit longer, started blogging. And it was all about my music. I grew up as a musician. I've played music for all my life since I can remember. You know, I was that kind of cliched kid hitting the pots and pans with wooden spoons on the kitchen floor. And then, started as a drummer, which as a highly sensitive person was quite, carried some irony, because I hated loud noises. So there's a photo of me sat behind my cousin's drum kit when I was about, I don't know, it must have been about 3 or 4, I think, maybe a little bit older. But I've got, I'm playing sort of one-handed, and I've got like my shoulders covering my ears so that I can't hear the noise that I'm creating. But there's always something about, I don't know, the process of making music, and there's something magical about the drum kit in particular for me that was just like, I could not escape it. And so, was playing in bands growing up, and then started writing songs when I was a teenager. And then, 2005, put out my first album under the name At Them Schema. And then that's when I just a bit after that, probably about 2008, 2009, started a blog, just really just talking about my experiences. I suppose a way of giving, just putting a bit more into my website, my music website, than just kind of gig listings and that kind of stuff. Because I was told that's what you got to do. Keep it dynamic. Keep up the search engine. Even back then. And then I read Carl, what's his name? 10 Myths of Being an Introvert. Carl.
I don't think I've ever read it, but maybe I need to.
It was a blog post. Yeah. Hold on. Carl King, that's it. Came across this this blog post that Carl King had written, 10 Myths About Being an Introvert, and it's just one after another of these things that you might believe about yourself because it's kind of linked to being an introvert, and then actually it's not true. So things like being shy and being antisocial, that kind of stuff. I was like, oh man, like every one of those I'm resonating with. And so started really looking into what that word meant, because I'd only heard it in really, really negative ways. So like, when there's a news report of some crazy loner person who's done a mass school shooting or something like that, and it's always that word that's used, like, an introverted, and so it just carried negative connotations. And then reading that was like, okay, that's interesting, look into it a little bit more. And then I read The Introvert Advantage, Marty Olson Laney, and then the whole thing was just like, oh. And so I was writing about what I was discovering on my blog. So I'd kind of written about that article, and then pieced things like together with my experiences kind of performing live, because that was always a thing that I struggled on and off with, like, gigging as a musician. And there'd be days where I'd have a gig in the evening, I'd be like, just no part of me wants to go and do this. And actually I soon realized it wasn't the actual performing that was a problem. It was all the stuff around it. So all the energy management of, getting to the venue, finding somewhere to park, going and meeting the promoter and sound guys and sound checking and getting food, and all of those little details were the things that were really, just causing me to, I don't want to do that. And so I'd written about that on my blog, and these were the articles that were really resonating with readers. And so people were starting to ask more questions about, like, I kind of wrote that thing about being an introvert, like I really resonate with that. Like, can you tell me more about that? And asking other questions. So it was kind of a natural evolution of putting out articles in response to the questions that was being asked. And then, and the podcast was the same. So when the podcast started, it was a pretty much an independent music podcast. So I was just sharing bands that I'd played with, and just trying to give more exposure to under the radar artists. And then I kind of got a bit more like courage to talk a little bit more, and then I'd kind of share a bit of this sort of stuff, and they were the things that people were just really reacting to that stuff. So over time it became, right, this is all of a sudden, this is what I'm talking about, this is what I'm writing about. And the good thing was I enjoyed it. So it wasn't a case of like, oh, these people have pushed me into this corner where I'm having to talk about this.
Right.
So yeah, and over time it's just sort of evolved into where it is today.
There's so many things that you said that I want to ask you about that I had to find a piece of paper so I could take notes. I remember all of them.
Right.
So the first thing is performing, which I want to talk to you about writing music too, but performing to me seems incredibly terrifying. Was it difficult for you at first, or do you enjoy the whole process? Just being up in front of people.
I think I'd had sort of a nice ease into it to some extent, because being a drummer to start with, that wasn't there wasn't quite the pressure of that I'd experienced later on when I was sort of singing and stuff. And so, yeah, like I was drumming in all sorts of different environments as well, and that wasn't, that wasn't particularly. If I had to do a drum solo, that would have been scary. But being on stage and playing became quite a natural thing. I remember when I did my first solo gig behind the piano, that was terrifying, mainly because it was in a little venue where I was just in the corner, and there wasn't supposed to be like, it wasn't a gig. It was just some bloke playing music in the corner. So the scary thing was, I'm going to be playing to loads of people who really don't want me here playing music. And I was thinking, because I've been in that situation when you're just trying to have a quiet drink and there's some person like making a racket in the corner. So that was a scary part of that. But then as soon as I started playing, it was almost like all those fears kind of just like dispersed. And that's been my experience performing like consistently, is as soon as I like hit that first note and I start playing, I'm kind of in this place that isn't the place that I'm in, if that makes sense. It's and I always say, like, when people talk about I could never perform, or especially if they're like equating being an introvert to, because I've had people say you can't be an introvert because you perform, and it's like, that's not the way it works. And actually there's a real advantage to being to some of the strengths that we have as introverts, where the way that we can maybe prepare very in a lot of detail puts you in a place where actually when you get on stage and you're doing that thing, you just enter that almost muscle memory place, and it's you can be in the zone and in flow where other people might actually be ultra aware of, I'm on stage and I'm performing. For me, it's like that's not what happens in my head, and I don't know if that's just me, but I'm like, it's a cool thing. And that's why I say, like, that's almost the easy bit. That once I get to that bit, it's like, right, I'm enjoying this now. It's all the other stuff. It's the talking to other people around, before you go on stage and all of that stuff. It's
all the details that you mentioned are things that I struggle with too. Every time I'm going somewhere new, especially, I just moved to Boston a couple of years ago, so parking is like a disaster. And I just went to dinner last night with one of my friends, and we went to this place where there's literally nowhere to park, and I was panicking about it, and she's like, why is it such a big deal? Because she's lived in Boston for a long time, and she knows how to parallel park, and she does the whole thing. And I'm like, no, you don't understand what kind of an issue this is for me. Like, it's a really big problem. But also,
do you find that like, if you were to go again, would you feel more confident and you'd be happy?
Yeah. I mean, it's always like the first time I go someplace new, I like to use Google and Google like Street View, so I know exactly the building I'm looking for, and I know if they have a parking lot, and I know where I'm supposed to go in, because I think there's just a lot of fear around looking ridiculous because you don't know where you're going. And I don't know why that is, but I know a lot of us struggle with looking ridiculous at any time because, it's that whole perfectionism thing that we're always trying to get over.
Yeah.
But it helps a lot. The first time is like the worst.
Hmm.
But then the second time is always a little bit better because you kind of know what to expect. Um, and especially if you're looking for a specific person, once you've met them before, then it's a lot easier.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I find that with places as well, like with restaurants or bars and
mhm.
stuff like that. Like once, if you're going back again for the second or third time, whatever, there's a confidence that just comes from being familiar with an environment, which is, yeah, it's
Yeah,
weird. And then
I get into the
say that
habit.
to some people, they don't get it at all. But yeah.
Yeah, I get into the habit of going to the same places because I know what to expect and I like the
Hmm.
food. And I get my coffee at the same place every single morning. And some of my friends, I have this group of, there's three of us, we like to go out to dinner. And the two of them always want to pick a different place to go. Like every single time we go out, they want to go to a new place. And I'm like, can't we just go to the same place? And it's nice
Yeah.
to have friends who are opposite of you in some respects, but in the other, in a situation like that, it's like every time it's your turn to pick, we go to one of two restaurants and they're like right next to each other in the same place. I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, because that's what I like. I know what
Yeah.
to expect.
Yeah. And that, I mean, that's true though, with having friends who kind of pull you outside of that, that's a really good gift to have, I think, as well. Like however frustrating it might, it's just like, oh no, that's terrifying. But
Yeah.
actually, like after you've been through experience, I've got friends who I've been traveling with and that kind of thing, which I would never have instigated, um, or driven, but the fact that I've got friends who did make it afterwards a really, really valuable experience. So yeah, I think there's something really powerful about that. Having a variety of different personality types in a friendship group can be a good thing. Obviously it can be a terrible thing as well, but if
It's
you're all on the same sort of page, it's quite good. Yeah.
right. It's nice to have different groups too. So I have this
Mm.
group and they're kind of extroverts, even though they claim that they're not, but they really are.
Yeah.
um, and then I've made a couple of friends who are INFJs, and it's a whole different experience going out with them,
Mm.
which is nice too, because we don't have conversations about the weather or the news or their kids. We have conversations about the meaning of life
Yeah.
and, our hopes and our dreams. And you can sit there for 3 hours and it feels like 15 minutes.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, that's brilliant when you have those sorts of friends. You just like delve straight in. Yeah, no small talk at all. It's just, yeah, love it.
right? Yeah. So I wanted to ask you too about podcasting because it's really not something that you think about introverts doing. And I know that it was a struggle for me when I first started. And when I'm recording episodes by myself, it's still incredibly difficult. And I kind of have that feeling, which I'm pretty sure you mentioned, of like, when you're thinking about doing something, when you're, getting ready to talk to somebody, it's like, oh, why did I do this? I don't want to do
Mm.
this. Like, what am I doing here? But then
Yeah.
once you get started, then it's a great experience and you're glad that you did it. Did you
Mm.
have the same feeling about podcasting or was it different?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, uh, when I first started, it was, as I mentioned, like just purely music. So I
Mhm.
probably introduce, just say, this is whatever song by whatever band. You can find them at their website. Um, but then it was when I started talking about stuff that it suddenly became like, oh, I'm really aware of the sound of my voice and the speed of my talking, and it was I would just, I'd re-record and then re-record and re-record and re-record. It's like I can't get it right, and it was just a case of relentless repetition, really, of putting out episode after episode, and I would never go back and listen again to an episode that I'd done, just because it was like cringeworthy, and there is something about hearing your own voice in that sort of respect that you're not a very good critic of your own work when it comes to that.
I never realized how I talk until I started editing my own podcast episodes. And even now I still sit there and edit them, and I'm like, I had no idea that I had such trouble pronouncing words. Like, I thought I knew how to talk, and that it doesn't sound like I do.
Yeah. But it's that stuff that people no one else really notices.
Right.
And, yeah, just letting go of that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
no,
I think you learn a lot from editing your own stuff, though, because then, you do start to pay attention to it, but at the same time, it's like I'm sitting there being terribly critical of myself, and then I'm having to remind myself, no, you need to show yourself some more grace. You need to stop doing this, because nobody cares that you can't pronounce certain words correctly.
Oh, totally. And I've actually found that, like, because I don't do a huge amount of editing on my podcast, and there's the things that, like, I would instinctually be like, right, I need to get rid of that. It's embarrassing that I've said that or made that mistake. And actually leaving that stuff in and really making it human they're the things that people remember and people pick up on in a good way. Like, not in a, you idiot, like, I can't believe you said that. Like, and also in terms of episodes, like consistently, I experience that thing where you put together an episode and it feels like disjointed, and it doesn't feel like you've quite communicated things properly, and that kind of stuff. And they're invariably the episodes that people really connect with for some reason. And I've experienced that time and time again. And then the opposite side of that, where I'm like, I've nailed it. Like, the message in this episode is brilliant. I sound so clever. This is, this is going to change the world. And it's like crickets in response to it. I'm like, seriously, did you not listen to it? It's like, it's not that great.
Yeah, I've noticed that with my blog too. There are some blog posts where I'm like pouring my heart out, sitting there with tears streaming down my face, writing all of these words, and I post it, and everybody's like, half the people read it who normally read it, and I'm like, what? Why doesn't that work? I mean, this is a big thing for me. And then the biggest post, the most read post on my website was something that I wrote for Halloween. And I don't really celebrate Halloween. I was just like, oh, okay, this is, this week is Halloween, so let me do something that kind of ties in with that maybe people would, notice. So it's something about the dark side of the INFJ or something. Mm-hmm. And so many people read it, probably twice as much as the next read post. So wow. I'm like, oh, okay. I mean, I did put some work into it, but it wasn't like one of those really powerful ones that I felt like would be a big deal. So when we're talking about writing and podcasting, do you find it difficult to put yourself out there, especially when you're writing songs, which I feel like is incredibly personal?
Yeah, it's I've kind of ebbed and flowed with it over the years, really. And like, in terms of my songwriting, I'd take quite an abstract approach in some ways. So I mean, like the last set of songs that I wrote, I had a really intensive songwriting session at the end of 2018, where I wrote 6 songs in about 4 days, I think, and they all just came pouring out. Like, I'd been through some very tough times in my life, and they just came out, and it was a reminder that actually, for me, like, songwriting has always been the kind of primary way that I both kind of process my emotions, process the way that I'm feeling the world, and also see it and understand how I'm feeling a little bit more. So it's over the past probably 8 or 9 years, I've really tied it in with journal writing as well. So it's kind of the songwriting might be like just that raw, okay, write whatever's there, and without editing, without trying to make sense of it, and trying to force things into the gaps and all that sort of stuff. And then with the journal writing, it's kind of a slightly more analytical, but I don't think that's the right word, but just more reflective of, okay, I think this song is kind of exploring this, and this is telling me that I'm feeling this, and just connecting dots and then working out, okay, right, what do I need to do in order to fully process this or whatever. But yeah, as I say, like the songwriting of, I don't know, it's there's always an element when sharing that feels like massively vulnerable. I'm much more comfortable writing and recording and just doing all the production side of things on my own and just really enjoying that process. And then suddenly when it comes time to like release it, it's like, oh, that feels very different, because you're basically giving other people permission to interpret it and to bring their own, and there's something beautiful about that, because people connect with it in their own stories. And especially music is massive in that respect. Like, I've had people say this song helped me through a bereavement, and this song helped me through, and it's like, the song has nothing to do with that, it's not come from that place, but it's, this meaning has been created by virtue of the fact that music is there and it's connected with that person going through that particular thing. So yeah, there's something beautiful about and necessary about releasing it and letting it go. But there's also something terrifying about it for absolute sure. Yeah.
Yes, there's something about music that, I don't know, it's just, it's incredibly powerful. And I feel like for me, a lot of times I have problems expressing my emotions or even trying to figure out what it is that I'm feeling. It's just kind of this mess. And a lot of times I find it in songs. And so I'll try, and explain it to one of my friends, and they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. And then I'll hear this song and be like, here, listen to this. This is exactly what it is. This is what I'm trying to tell you.
Yeah.
It makes such a huge difference. You did a TEDx talk. And one of the things that I noticed about that was incredibly powerful, you said something about actively noticing what we passively notice. That's something, to me, I mean, that means so much, because I feel like in the last year, I've really been focusing on a lot of those things, kind of like what we started talking about being introverted and people telling you that you're wrong for being introverted, and just the little things that you take in and how they affect you. That's kind of what I got from that. Is that what you meant when you said that?
Yeah, I think so. It's about 5 years ago since I did that talk now, but yeah, it was kind of and it relates as well to the probably that songwrite, the going with your natural reactions and instincts to things, and then taking that time to notice what it is that you're noticing. And from perspective of being a highly sensitive person as well, it was just a kind of a sense of noticing actually what you notice. And it was in reference to some work I did. I spent time caring for a family friend who had dementia, and so it was about communication and about the way that things are communicated beyond language. So he like John was in a place where he could not express his like what he was thinking, what he was feeling, but there was communication going on all the time. And so I felt very attuned to him at that level of, I can understand what it is he's saying, so I can almost intuitively get the thing that he needs or whatever. And so it was a case of like noticing things at a deeper level, because so much of life is at that surface level. It's everything's how things appear and how we perceive things and all this sort of stuff. And actually noticing what we are noticing is going beyond the language, it's going beyond the surface. It's noticing what we're feeling when we're having a particular conversation, or when we're experiencing a piece of art or a piece of music or whatever it is, and then doing something with that. And I think that's one of the keys to kind of getting that sense of almost purpose for ourselves. Like, it's such a cliche and so difficult to pin down. Find your passion, do you like, and it's just a small way of locating that sense of what matters to you, is just to notice, okay, what is it in this room that really stands out to me? What is it that I notice? And a lot of the time we take for granted the things that we notice, or the way that we see the world, and we assume that everybody else sees it in the same way, or everybody else has seen this thing, or will have noticed what it is that we've noticed, and so often that's not the case. And yeah, there's something then really powerful about the vulnerability of sharing that, which is not, especially for a lot of us as quiet types. It's I don't like at school. I remember I studied English literature at so at A level, so I was about 16, 17, and really found it like very naturally connected to exploring kind of literature and film and that kind of stuff, and finding themes and noticing stuff within text and all that kind of thing. And so that I remember in classes, the teacher would be like, well, what's standing out in this or whatever. And I would never speak up, because it's like, well, the only thing I've noticed is like obvious, like everybody already knows that. So let me, take a bit more time. And then if the teacher would pick on you, which invariably they do when you're sort of terrified of being picked on, then I'd just come out with something. And then there was several times where the teacher would be like, oh, wow, yeah. And other people in the class would be like, man, where does that come from? And I'm like, it's obvious, isn't it? And then you're like, I feel really, not in an arrogant way, but like, and it's just that reminder of like, actually the things that we might think are obvious, the things that you see when you look at stuff, it's not necessarily the case that everybody's seeing that. And so it's, then having the courage to bring it out, if there's a reason to, but
Yeah. I'm in the process of writing my first book, and I wrote the whole book and I sent it to my editor, and she's like, we need to talk. And I'm like, oh, that doesn't sound good. And she goes, your whole book is in the first 3 chapters. I'm like,
oh, wow.
No, there's like 12 chapters. And she goes, no, you need to like basically start over again. And she goes, you cannot put everything that you know into one book. And I'm like, well, that's not everything I know. And she goes, but you have to explain it more. And I'm like, well, everybody already knows the basics. And she goes, no, people don't know the basics. You need to explain the most basic thing. She's like, you're trying to write a book to explain what an INFJ is, and you need to write it as if you're talking to somebody who doesn't know what it is. And I'm like, oh, okay. So first of all, I feel really ridiculous because I didn't think about it that way.
Yeah.
But then I spent yesterday trying to explain what intuition is. And, I come up with all these examples, and I can tell you what it's not. And when I was listening to your TED Talk about actively noticing what you already noticed, that's exactly what it is. It's like this automatic thing that you're just picking up all of this information from everywhere. But then you have to really sit down and say, okay, I'm actually noticing what's going on, and then processing it in a different way. That made a lot of sense in that cool. Respect about intuition.
That's a really good point as well, about putting your whole book in 3 chapters. And as people who, for anyone who blogs or does a podcast and about a specific topic, as you go on, you can, and I am very, very guilty of this, like you just assume that everybody knows that, like they've been on the entire journey that you've been on, and so it can be, you can just completely forget to go back to the basics and there's a massive chasm between, someone coming to it for the first time and where you've got to, which, and it's difficult to get that balance of, for those people who have been with you, they don't want to be hearing the same things over and over and over.
Right.
But it's kind of, interesting to get that balance.
Yeah. But then the most popular question that I get is what's an INFJ? And I'm like, why do you follow me on Instagram? Why are you reading my blog if you don't know what it is? I mean, I'm glad that you are, and I appreciate that you do, but I'm confused. Like,
that's interesting. Yeah.
And it's nice that, that they resonate with what I'm talking about, but all of it is very specific to INFJ. So it's like, if you don't know what that is, then how did you even find my blog? So I wanted to ask you about your blog and some of the most popular posts on there, because every single one of them really resonated with me. One of the big ones is about being reluctant to talk on the phone. So my day job, I work as a marketing manager for a small technology company, and most of what we do is digital marketing. So I don't really talk to people. I do social media and I write emails and I do strategy around, website planning and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So my boss told me a few weeks ago, he's like, I want you to call one of our customers and ask them for a testimonial. And I'm like, oh, how about I send him an email? And he goes, no, I want you to call them and talk to them. And I'm like, oh, please don't make me do that. Why would you do that to me? And I ended up writing a blog post about it, and so many people resonated with it too. Making a phone call is just such a terrifying thing. And I was thinking about it the other day. When I was young, I used to fight with my siblings over who would answer the phone. Every time it rang, it was like this novel thing, and we would all run through the house to pick up the phone.
Oh, you don't all want to answer the phone.
Right, yeah.
Crazy.
That was before caller ID, that was before you could tell who was calling at all. So now when my phone rings, I look at it and I'm like, why are you calling me? I don't know who you are. Like, why would you do that? It's such a big thing that so many people resonate with.
Yeah, I found that. Yeah, that's an old post as well. So I think that was 2011 I wrote that.
Right.
And and it was like out of frustration of I kept getting called by certain people, and no one would leave a voicemail either. And so it was always a case of like, well, if you don't leave a voicemail, I'm not going to ring back, because it's obviously not important. But then there was this expectation, like, I've rung you, ring back. And so the article was just a number of kind of the frustrations with the phone. So it's that kind of sense of it being an interruption. And from a creative flow perspective, it's one of those things that I've always found really tough. So like the sound of the phone ringing just sends shivers down my spine, and I'm like, and so and that kind of sense of, and I kind of probably blow it way out of proportion in my head, but that sense of an interruption, the sense of it being entitled to and I think this extends as a metaphor probably to other things now, because I think obviously social media is so much bigger than it was when I wrote that article even, and so that sense of always having to be on, and with mobile phones you're never out. So at least with landlines it was a case of you'd call back when you're home or when it's more convenient, but everybody knows that every couple of minutes at least we're pulling the phone out of our pocket, so we will have seen that someone has rung. So it's that sense of you can't escape, and people know, okay, you've actively not called me back, and those kind of open loops I find really draining. So if someone's rung and I haven't called them back, or they've left a message, like that can be that it just sits in your mind as like you've just created an item on my to-do list that I didn't want you to add, but I need to somehow process that, and so that was a big thing. And then I think just the talking on the phone itself, like if I'm making a phone call, I have to put myself in a room, shut the door. I don't want anyone overhearing me. There's something about being overheard on the phone that I just find I hate it.
Yeah. And that was part of my problem at
And
work.
so,
uh,
yeah,
that was part of my problem at work because I work in a cubicle in an open, kind of an open office. We have little cubicles, but you can still hear everybody. So me talking on the phone is just like, oh, I felt like I was on display.
yeah,
And I hate that feeling.
yeah.
Um, if it would have been a whole lot better if I had an office where I could shut the door. So at least it's just me that's hearing it and the person on the other end of the phone.
Exactly. Yeah. And
I,
that's because like scheduling the call as well it's one of the things that I'd kind of said as a way to still use the phone, because I know, like, you can't escape the phone completely, but like just having that sense of like, okay, I know that between 6 and 7 I'm going to call people back, or I'm going to make those calls, and I can tell them, okay, I'm going to ring you between that time, and I've got 10 minutes or whatever. And just, I suppose, establishing boundaries and setting expectations is quite a I don't know, have you read Cal Newport's Digital Minimalism book? He talks, there's someone who does it, basically creates like phone office hours, so 5 o'clock till 6 o'clock every evening. People know that that's when they can ring this guy, which I think is quite a cool way so I think it's his commute home after work. And so that's when people know I can just ring him to have a little chat or to run something by him. And then the rest of the time, that works for other people's expectations, and it also works for you. So like if I'm getting those calls, you just shoot off a quick message like, ring me any day at 5 o'clock, and then that loop is closed.
yeah.
So that's something that I'm kind of working out how to bring that kind of thing into my own routine. But yeah, I don't have the luxury of a commute, but I'm working that one out.
it it resonated with me a lot because I'm one of those people, and my friends know this about me. I always have my phone in my hand or within arm's reach. It's always that way. Um, but that doesn't always mean that I'm open to talking on the phone.
Exactly. Yeah.
And especially when you see now on social media, on Facebook and Instagram, it tells you it tells your friends when you're on. And so they see that you're on, and some of the apps you can turn it off, not all of them. They see
It's
that
one of
you're
the things about WhatsApp. Yeah, and people can see when you've read something and when you're
yeah,
on, and
yeah.
it's like,
Like, oh, you're on, you must be available. And I'm like, no, just because I'm scrolling through Facebook does not mean that I'm available to talk. that's,
yeah.
that's
And
not.
then the fact that if you don't respond in that moment, the stories that then get written in the heads of other people, the ironic thing is it's the same. If you send someone a message and I know they've seen it, but they're ignoring it, and then you just create this kind of almost neurotic story about like what's this about, they hate me, and and it just creates mass anxiety and just nothing good.
Right? Yeah, yeah, for sure. I
Yeah.
had a friend a while ago who, every time we wanted to make plans, I just kind of, because I'm single and, I don't have a lot going on in my life. Well, I didn't in the past. I do kind of now. When I wanted to go out to lunch with her, I would just email her and say, hey, do you want to go out to lunch today? And she would be like, unfortunately, I can't, but let's schedule something next week.
Hmm.
And I thought, well, that's kind of weird and almost rude that she wants to schedule something next week. Like, what's wrong with today or tomorrow? But now that I've gotten a little bit older, I realize that that's so important to not just
Hmm.
expect people to jump whenever you say, hey, do you want to do something, but to actually give them time to plan. And because looking forward to it is half of the fun of actually going out, but
Hmm.
then being able to set boundaries around how you spend your time, um, is huge. That's
Yeah.
something that I'm learning, through trial and error, which is not a good way to do it.
Yeah.
Overscheduling yourself is not a good way to say, okay, I can't do this anymore.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. And that's and it's one of the values of society, is just the busy bubble. And you've like it. I think being forced into a position where you have to make an excuse not to do something, like it's one of the things that I really struggle with. So like certain questions, if if someone says like, what are you up to on Tuesday evening, and it's like, oh, I've got a free evening and I'm really looking forward to having a free evening, but
Right.
the onus is then on you to either say I'm busy, or normally the reaction is I'm not doing anything, and then that almost gives them permission to fill your evening.
Right.
Um, so yeah, that's it. Being really kind of intentional with the way that we think about our time and the way that we talk about our time as well is really important for introverts in managing our energy, and yeah, not overstretching ourselves, and just thinking, okay, I've got the freedom to say I really would like to go out to lunch, but I can't this week. Next week looks good. Tuesday, how about that?
Yeah.
And that, yeah, and there's nothing to be afraid of in doing that and in establishing that. And actually, the margin that we can create around our lives can just make so much more stuff possible in terms of our own well-being and energy and health.
Yes. Yes. There's been so many times that people ask me, what did you do last weekend? Or my friend asked me just the other night, what do you normally do on Saturdays? And I'm like, nothing. And she goes, oh, well, why not? And I'm like, because I like to do nothing.
Mm,
I like to lay in bed and watch cooking shows and look at social media. I like to have the freedom to write a blog post if there's something that I've been thinking about.
yeah,
Doing nothing to me is not boring. It's not a problem. It's a luxury.
yeah. And it's reframing that as nothing is not nothing. Nothing is a thing.
Right.
It's yeah. So
Right.
even just thinking of, okay, what can I say? How can I frame my nothingness in a
Right.
way that turns it into something? And
Yeah.
it for introverts, it is that recharge time. Especially at the weekend, if you're working with people all week, and you're doing stuff in the evenings or whatever, and it's yeah, just that. Okay, no, it's a vital battery charging time. That's not nothing. It is a, and that actually can help to be more intentional about, okay, what are the things that do fill my batteries back up, because I think there can be a tendency, like for me, I've experienced it, where I'll just really burn myself out and then hoard alone time, and not actually, like, I'll end up just draining myself even further because I'll be doing things that aren't nourishing, or it's just kind of numbing stuff, and actually, yeah, that's just as draining in some respects, but it's because I'm not being intentional about, okay, well actually, if I sit at the piano for half an hour and write some music or just play some music, I know that will help on a Saturday or whatever it might be,
Right.
for different people. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's one more thing that I want to ask you about, that really, somebody sent me an article this morning and it really got me fired up, honestly, which doesn't happen very often, but I noticed a blog post of yours that was about the same topic. So the article that I was reading was about introverts basically being broken extroverts. And it was written by a psychologist who has this theory that there are 4 different types of introverts, and he equated being introverted with being shy. And he says you have to figure out what type you are so that you know what problem you have to fix, so that basically you can fix your introversion so that you're a normal extrovert like normal people are.
Mm,
Um,
right.
and it was just so horrifying for me to sit there and read it, because I don't equate being introverted with being broken.
Mm,
And I also think that being shy is different from being introverted. You can be a shy introvert. You can also be a shy extrovert. And you can be a not shy introvert too.
yeah.
And I noticed that you wrote a blog post about the same issue, or about the same thing. So I'm anxious to hear your thoughts about it.
Yeah, that's quite a. It was one of the more amusing, certainly, titles that I've given to a blog post, which is like, what is it, the definitive guide to stop being introverted, or something like that. Which it's quite. What I found most interesting about it is people. There's been 2 or 3 comments from people who clearly haven't actually read the articles. It's all tongue in cheek,
Right.
and they've gone straight to the comments and be like, can't believe people like you should never tell people to stop being introverted. And I was like, if you go back and read the article rather than just jumping to your own conclusions.
Right.
But yeah, anyway. So yeah, it's kind of going through different aspects of the kind of natural temperament, characteristics of introverts, and just saying, I think making the point by exaggerating, basically, to say, if you want to stop being an introvert, then fill all your time with activities, never spend any time alone, and basically going through all these things that, to me, I was like, what would be the worst thing that I could possibly do for my own sense of well-being and health and all of that. And then just going through those things and saying, if you want to do that, then do that. And just making the point of like, actually, we're different. And the things that charge extroverts are the things that drain introverts. And a lot of the time, the things that charge introverts will be things that drain extroverts. And so just appreciating that, and like framing it so that it's not about, changing who we are, but it's about that's growing self-awareness of, okay, these are the ways that I can, how am I going to function at my best so that I can do the things that matter most to me, essentially, is the simplest way that I think about, well, all the stuff that I do. Like, when I'm talking to people, it's like, okay, well, what do you want to do? Your personality isn't going to stop you from doing whatever it is that really resonates with you. And so it's just a case of like managing it, understanding it, becoming self-aware, and then doing it in the way that's going to help you most. And so focusing on that sort of fixing the problem of being an introvert or becoming more of an extrovert, it's like, well, okay, why would be my first question. And I always kind of come back to Brian Little, who wrote me, myself, and I. That's a film. Me, myself, and us, something like that. And he talks about different kind of personality testing schools and all that sort of stuff. And he talks about acting out of character and how framing it as a good thing to think about. So, what are the things in life that are worth acting out of character for? And he's looking at the big 5 personality traits when he's talking about that. But with the kind of introversion as an example. So he's a professor and he's really energetic when he's delivering lectures and stuff. And he does a really good TED talk that he's done, where he's like, basically, everyone here will think that I'm an extrovert just because of the way that I'm presenting myself. But what you haven't seen is the fact that before this talk and after this talk, I'll be like curled up in the bathroom stall, just on my own, like, and I'll need like an hour to myself just to, prepare and to recover. Right. And he's saying, we all have these things that personal projects, like important projects, and these are different for every individual. They're the things that, like me drumming, basically, like that would be a good example of, this is something that really matters to me, and you are prepared for that. You're willing to sacrifice acting out of character. So extending that, and to think of it like an elastic band. So like your introversion, your extroversion, and you're willing to go like stretch it out for the sake of this thing. So like he uses the example of a mother with a kid, and she's very introverted, but the kid really, really wants a birthday party. So for 2 hours, she acts out of character, puts on this party, is dealing with all these things, all the other kids and other parents and all that sort of stuff. And it's exhausting, but it matters because she wants to do this thing for her child. And then when you are aware that you can expand that, rubber band, you then become aware of, well, what do I need to do when it kind of pings back? How do I prepare at the front end, and how do I recover at the other end? And actually, we've got that freedom to act out of character, to not be completely defined by being an introvert, being sensitive, but actually it's a like learning how to manage it, learning how to work with it, and freeing ourselves to be able to think, actually, do you know what, this really matters to me, and I am able to do it. It just takes a bit of planning, and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think coming back to that article, like, that's the message really, as opposed to like fixing. It's not about fixing, it's about understanding, it's about becoming aware, and it's about learning more about ourselves so that we can do what matters most to us.
Yeah, I love that example too. So many times people, you hear or read articles about what career is right for an introvert or an INFJ, and a lot of them list careers where you're not having any communication with anybody. And I think a lot of people get confused on those things, especially for me. I have worked in marketing for 10 years, and you don't see marketing as a career type for an introvert or an INFJ.
No.
One of the marketing jobs that I had to go to events every single week. And you're talking about events that had 100,000 people, and it was my job to manage. I managed anywhere from 25 to 700 people at one time, and I had to stand up in front of them and talk to them, and do this hospitality thing all day long, where I'm talking to them constantly and making sure that they have everything that they need. And it was one day a week, but then it also involved a plane ride, 2 plane rides actually in the same day to wherever we were going. And a lot of times, the first year it involved going to a lot of places I'd never been before, and rental cars. So you're driving a new car that you've never had and trying to find a gas station, which are all these little details that we were talking about before. And it was like it was an amazing experience because I loved going to these events and I loved talking to people about, what was going on at the event. But it was also the most exhausting thing that I did. And so the day before, it was like this anxiety about having to do it. And then the day of, there was a little bit of anxiety, but once we got going, it was awesome. And then as soon as I got on the plane to go home, it was like, I just felt so incredibly tired. And the next day I was just basically in bed trying to recover. But I did that for 3 years and I loved it. And I hate the idea that being introverted has to hold you back from certain things in your life. Totally. I don't think that it does. I think, like you said, you just have to learn how to manage it.
That's exactly, and have those mechanisms in place. And that when you talk about the ideal jobs for these people, it's like, the ideal job for you is the thing that really is like important to you. Like, what is it's working out what is the area that I want to be working in, who do I want to be serving, or whatever. And just reminded me of so I had a gig last night, and before I went to the venue, I was like imagining the moment where I get back at the end. I was like, I can't wait to be back on the sofa with a G&T, just chilling out. And so that was like for me, the thing, the recovery mechanism at the end. It's like, I know that will happen, and I will get to that place at the end of the night, and that'll be the moment I can be like, but really, really glad that I've done this thing that is draining. It is exerting a lot of energy. But I know that it's worth it, and I know that I will be okay at the end, and I can chill out tomorrow, and I can do those things that charge me back up so that I can go out there and I can do it again. And and that's what, I'd say is really important to think about for anybody who is thinking, I can't do this, that, or the other because I'm an introvert, because I, don't have what it takes from that perspective. It's like, you just need to work out where you can put those margins in. And I think coming back to that word margin again is really important. If there is no margin, if there are no boundaries, then it's audit your time and work out, okay, where can I, put that space in, because it's really important. And ultimately it's the way to be more productive. Because that's so often the word that we hear everywhere, isn't it? productivity, which we equate with doing more. But it's like, no, actually, it's being more effective. And the way to be more effective is to do less, but to do it better.
Right. Yes. Absolutely. 100%. So tell us where we can find you, your website and your social media and your podcast.
Yeah, I mean, everything just through andymort.com. Yeah, you can find me on social media through there. You can find the podcast there. There's links to my music and to the Haven as well. So yeah, that's the best place.
I hope that you guys enjoyed that interview as much as I did. Andy is such a great person to talk to, and he has such amazing advice and insight for all of us. Just as a reminder, one more time, you can watch the video interview on YouTube at youtube.com/The Quiet Ones Podcast, and you can find all of the links in the show notes on my website, which is thequietonespodcast.com. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you again next week.